Hello guys, in this little video we are going to install Arch Linux under Virtualbox, or we are creating a new virtual machine with Arch Linux. The first thing we're gonna do is you can go to archlinux.org, navigate to the Downloads tab and download the newest ISO. Currently the newest one is from March, so you can download it here via torrent for example, or you can also pick a mirror close to you. After you've done that, I already created a virtual machine with Arch Linux, basic machine, 2 cores, 4 gigs of RAM. I don't need much since this is only a base installation. But you can of course always alter the hardware or give it more RAM, more CPU, as you please. The first thing I'm always going to do is I've booted Arch and I will check, do I have a network address? Yes, I received the address via DHCP. And the next thing, since I don't want to work with this little VirtualBox window or console, I will do the rest over SSH. So I'll start SSHD, go to my terminal, and we have the 179 address. But keep something in mind. If you do this, oh, I already had a host with that IP address. That happens. Let's quickly fix that. And let's also get root. And you see here it wants a password, but we have not yet set a password. So go back to your virtual machine, type in passwd, and root now has a password. So we can go back to our terminal and connect to it, and we are connected into the live environment. Let me put that VM on the side now. So the first thing we're going to do, we want to partition the disk. So first of all, let's see what we got. We have an 80 gig hard drive here. This is what I created, an 80 gig virtual hard disk. The first thing we're going to do is we want to partition that drive. I will do a GPT layout. I will make one partition, the first partition, make it 500 megabytes, and type of that partition will be EFI. You can see here we have an EFI system partition now, since we will be using UEFI to boot. Next thing, I will make one big partition which spans the entire disk, which will be my root partition where everything resides. Write that to the disk, and now we need to make the file system. First of all, we do the FAT32 one for the EFI partition, like so, and I most of the times pick extended 4 and give it a label of Arch root and select the partition we've just created. There we go. Alright, after that is done, we need to mount our root partition. To do that, we do a mount def sda2 and mount it under mnt or mount. Next thing on the list, we want to create the boot directory. Since we've just formatted the EFI partition, sda1 mount boot. Okay, with that out of the way, we can see our 2 partitions are mounted. Next thing on the list, we need to pick a mirror. To do that, we will use nano etc pacman d mirror list. Pick something that's close to you. I will not alter the mirror list right now because these mirrors are physically, well, near to me. After that is done, we can go over to Packstrap. Packstrap installs the base packages. You need to give it the directory where your new file system is mounted, in this case mount. And we need to select what packages we want to install. In this case, we want to install the Linux kernel, the base meta package, which pulls in all the necessities, and I will also install base devel, vim, mandb, and man pages. This will take a while. I will pause the video when the installation is finished. And the installation is done. You can see all the packages were installed, no errors. So the next thing on the list, we need to generate our fstab file. To do that, we will use genfstab. The official installation guide says you should use the -U option for UUIDs. I always choose uppercase -L for label. Again, this is totally up to your needs or what you prefer. In my case, I prefer labels. So let's have a look at our newly created FS tab, check that everything is alright. We have the root file system and the EFI partition, so that looks good. Next thing, or one of the most important parts, we need to root into our new environment. So we use arch-root mount, so we are now inside our rooted directory, and we need to set up the time zone. Under user share zone info, you can find the different regions. Again, pick what you need. I will choose Europe Berlin, and the symlink will be local time. There we go. You can also check that under Etsy, and the link is created. Next thing on the list, we need to generate our locales. But before we do that, we need to sync the hardware clock. So you use HW clock sys to hardware clock. There we go. And now over to our locale config. Open the file local.gen under Etsy. Oh, I don't have nano, of course. And pick the locale you need or want. In my case, I will use the US locale since I have my systems always in English. Next of all, generate the locales. This will only take a couple of seconds. And now we need to go over to configure our keyboard and our language. First of all, we will do our language. Create the file local.conf. Select the language you need, in my case ENUS UTF-8, and in the next step we need to configure our keyboard. The file is vconsole.conf under Etsy. Enter your desired key map, in my case DE for German, and we need to set the host name. This is done under Etsy hostname, and give it any name you desire. In my case, I will call it VB Arch for VirtualBox Arch. Again, this is totally up to you. Next on the list, we need to generate the initial RAM file system. To do that, use make init cpio -p for preset and let it run. This usually takes a couple of seconds. It's not too long. I will not pause the video right now since it'll only, well, save you a couple of seconds of text scrolling by. Alright, so that was successful. And now we need to set the root password. Just type passwd and the password you'd so desire. In the next step, and this is an important step, we need to set up the bootloader. I will use grub in this example. And I will install grub and EFI boot manager. And after that, fs tools. There we go. So now we need to install grub. To do that, you can copy the command from the Arch Linux wiki. It's always the same. I would change the ID of the bootloader. This is not necessarily, you could leave in grub, but important is you need to set the EFI directory. In this case, my EFI directory is boot. That was the partition we created at the beginning of the installation. And let's install it. Alright, worked without problems. Now we need to create the grub configuration, which is located under boot grub.cfg. Alright, that worked also without any issues. And now we need to create a user. Since we don't want to use root all the time. So what we do here, -m is to create a home directory, -g is I add myself to the following group, which in this case will be wheel. I set up the shell and I set up my username. After that, I assign a password to my user. There we go. And we have our user created. After that is done, we could now basically reboot and boot into our new Arch Linux installation, but I also want to enable SSHD. So I install OpenSSH, do a systemctl enable to enable the service, and it worked. So, one little thing to keep in mind. We have not yet set up the network. What I do is I will use Network Manager. Let me install that quickly, and I will enable it. By default, Network Manager will run DHCP, so it gets a lease or a address. The system gets a address. We need to enable that. There we go. And now we've set up everything we need. The next thing on the list, what we need to do is we need to reboot the machine. First of all, we exit the root environment. We're now in the live CD, and we can reboot the system right now. Be sure to remove the CD, and we can see the bootloader. Arch Linux is loading, and our newly created VM is ready. Let's just check if we got an IP address. Yes, we have 182. We got a different lease this time, and we can SSH over to it. Oh, we still have the root user here. Let's remove that since it's not allowed. And we are booted into our fresh Arch Linux installation. We could, for example, now refresh the package cache. We could install sudo. We could install a desktop environment, all up to your needs. So this was just a basic little tutorial on how to install Arch Linux. I will link the general recommendations guide down in the description box, as well as the installation guide. Thank you guys for watching, and have a good day.